Hello, and welcome to the Ask the Industry podcast, episode 111. I'm comedian Simon Caine, and for those of you new to the show, this is the podcast where I interview the most influential people from the worlds of stand-up, comedy, radio, and today, cruise ships. Daniel Bartrope and Robin Cahill are both from Don Casino Entertainment, one of the biggest cruise ship entertainment companies in the world. I got them on during the Edinburgh Festival where they were scouting for new talent to talk about what they're looking for, what it takes to work as a cruise ship comedian, and what you can and can't say on the boat, as well as how the comedians deal with dying on stage and having to live with the audience that didn't like what they did. I found this fascinating, really interesting. As I mentioned in the podcast, my parents have recently started going on a lot of cruises and constantly tell me how much they enjoyed the entertainment on those cruises. Also, I've had friends of mine do gigs on cruise ships and give me the other side of it, shall we say, and they're not always positive, they're not always negative, but there's a varying degree between the two of responses and reactions to doing theatres on ships. So I found it really interesting to get their perspective. I hope you enjoy it as well. If you're new here, please do remember to hit the subscribe button. If you're old here, please do remember to give us an honest, ideally positive review in iTunes. And either way, please do join the Facebook group. It's called Ask the Industry Podcast and it's on Facebook, obviously. Before I hit play on the podcast, I just want to say that I have signed up for the Edinburgh Festival and I am currently previewing a show around the country. I won't go on about where and when that's going to be right now, but if you want to take a look in the show notes and have a look and see where I'm going to be previewing and where I'm going to be at the Edinburgh Festival, that would be great. I really appreciate seeing some of your faces at the shows. It's always lovely to have the audience come down and say, hey, it's me, I'm the person who tweets you, or hi, I'm a regular listener and I love it. So if you could come down to a show, that'd be really appreciated, or the Edinburgh Festival. And if you're not able to come down, if you could just pass on the message to a friend who's in the area, that would be massively, massively appreciated, and I can't thank you enough for the support. But for now, without any more delays, this is Dan Bartrope and Robin Cahill.
Hi, my name is Robin Cahill. I'm the Vice President of Operations and Development for Don Casino Agency in Miami, Florida. We're a talent agency that specializes in booking talent for the cruise industry. My background is in the cruise industry as a buyer. So I worked with Royal Caribbean for 20 years, and I worked for Disney Cruise Line for 4 years, and I've now been with Don Casino for about 4 years.
My name is Daniel Bartrope, and I am the talent manager of Don Casino. So I'm kind of the scout looking around for our new talent and coaching them, making sure they know what's going on when they go to the ships. My background is from the ships. I used to work on board as a cruise director. Before that, I was a performer myself in London. And so I've been with Don Casino now for 2 years.
Cool. I think the best place to start then is scouting. How do you look for talent, and what exactly makes a cruise performer?
Well, the best place to kind of scout for talent for us, I always think it's a little bit like dating. When you're trying to find someone, it's always a good idea to say, a friend of a friend. So I think a really good way to find talent is ask some of our great comics that we already have on our roster. Do you know anyone? That happens a lot. They'll send in their fellow comics they've met out there working. We also get a lot of people just knowing of us, of course, and submit through the website. So a lot of people go onto our website and send us their clips, and then we'll review promo. So promo is kind of the key for us, because people are all over the world. So it's not like you can say, hey, I have a show on Friday, come and see it. And where are you? Oh, Pakistan. Well, that's a bit too far. Yeah. So if you could just send a promo, that would be easier. So promo is the key for us. So the better the promo, the more likelihood of us wanting to know more about you. And then, of course, you physically can come and look at talent, which is what we're doing here at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Mm. And so a promo is like a 90-second clip, or is it, how long do you want? Because I'm assuming you're booking comedians to do an hour or a 20-minute spot on the ship. Do you want to see that?
The point of the promo really is to sell yourself in as short of time as possible, I would say. It's a very fast-paced business, and the buyers at the cruise lines, of course, managing some up to 25 to 30 ships at a time. So they don't have a lot of time to sit and watch a 10-minute tape of a comic. So if you can kind of throw in your best gags and some audience participation in it, so we can see how you're working with an audience, And like 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes would be max. But if we have the time as agents to sit and watch many to make sure we've got our backs covered and this is a solid act. But the actual buyers don't have that time, so they need to see a quick promo, and they see your best bits and go, okay, yeah, it looks good, it looks funny.
I'm just going to add something to that. I would leave out the 2 minutes of accolades that lead up to the. I'm just putting that out there because a lot of people will send us videos like that, and honestly, after 5 seconds, it's enough. We've seen enough of the accolades, and no buyer will sit through that. Make sure that the promo that you send is very high quality. It's really important to have high resolution photos that are representative of what you do. I know it's hard for a stand-up, but it could even just be a stand-up, looking maybe how you like to look in your show with a microphone just there. But a headshot doesn't really work, or standing up in front of a forest, that doesn't really work. So something that's a little more representative, like against the brick wall, that's obvious. People know you're a stand-up comic then if you kind of do a photograph that way. So it just helps to have the promo really representative of what you do, and it's always good to have a little bit of live footage so that the buyer can see in front of an audience. I mean, if it's all voiceover, then it doesn't really help the buyer.
I think my experience of doing American and UK gigs is America are much more hot on bigging up the act at the start and kind of reading out their CV. I think over, I don't know how your experience is, but I think over here we kind of go, you might have seen them in Leicester, yeah guys, come over. Whereas in America they sort of go, he's been on Netflix, he's done this, that sort of thing. And I always found that weird, because when I was over there they were just sort of reeling off everything I've ever done, and it sort of felt a lot more pressured in that way. It was kind of like, why does everyone need to know surely give me a chance in this room? Is that similar to what obviously you don't want to sit for everything every way, but is it similar to the fact you just want to get to, let's just see you live, it doesn't matter if you never won anything, or do you take stock to awards? What's
I think awards go a long way. I mean, some of our buyers really, especially when it comes to singers, they want people who have done The Voice. They want people who have been on X Factor and American Idol. So they are looking for that. Of course, they'll hire people that haven't done that. But yeah, I think it's a good idea to put it out there. It doesn't always have to be announced, but to have access to it is important. So we can maybe build a profile on our website that shows what you've done. I mean, one thing you have to understand that some of the buyers in the cruise industry haven't come from the entertainment industry. They might have come from administration or operations or somewhere else, and they've kind of slipped into a position where they find themselves buying talent now, and for the first time in their lives. So you really have to kind of spell it out for them and give them a real accurate picture of what this person does, because they don't have the vision to really see beyond. I mean, someone like Daniel and I, we've been working in the industry a long time. We have the vision, but we'll advise the performer, we can't put this on the website like this. You need to send us something where you're dressed better, or we need to see what it's going to look like, because we know what our buyers are up against.
You keep saying the word buyer. So for people who have no knowledge of this industry at all, that's someone who works on the ship, or they work in an office who just kind of in-house outsource to you to bring in the talent for the ship, or how does the buyer element of that work then?
Correct. So every cruise line will have a buyer, as you say, or a booker, and they have different capacities depending on the cruise line. Some may look after many ships. Some cruise lines have people one per ship. So it really does vary. Yeah, and then it kind of is up to us to go to them with our trusting relationship. Like, we promise you this guy is funny. And they go, okay, let's look at some promo. So yes, these people are working in the offices. They'll book the talent, and then the act would go on board. And when the act gets on board, there's then management on board who will look after the scheduling, for example. And that would normally be the cruise director.
And how much do the buyers or the team at the cruise line dictate what they want? Do they know we're after this type of comic, or do they just go, we just want a comic that will work in this room?
A lot of it might fall on our knowledge. So we like to check where, for example, there's so many factors. And comedy, I think, is the hardest on cruise ships because it's so specific to who's going to be sitting in the audience. I think a singer is a good singer or not a good singer. They can have the credentials as well, which helps. But with a comic, if you've got an all British audience, you're not going to put an American comic on. But often we'll have the hardest and the most difficult to book, I think, is when you have an international mix. You've got Australians in the audience, Americans, Brits, and European in general. It's like, wow, some Germans there for some fun. Yeah. And that's the hardest, because you have to find a comic that can appeal to all nationalities. So it's kind of, we don't want to put anyone on for a first time out in an audience they're not going to work, and then they get that bad report back and they've hated their time on board and it just wasn't a match. So we're really trying to put an act somewhere we think it'll be good for them, but judged on their comedy and their promo and our experience with them.
Just to add to that a little bit, some of the buyers or bookers from the cruise lines have had more experience in the industry than others. So there are some, they know what they're looking for and they can look at a video right away and say yes or no. Maybe they've been a cruise director before and they've moved up into an office position shoreside. But some of the others, like I said before, are coming from administrative positions and they've just kind of landed in this job because they're good at scheduling. So now they have to also learn the talent side, and some of those will rely more on us, and because we want to maintain our reputation, we're very careful how we put new talent out there. We just did a showcase, as a matter of fact, for a couple of the British lines, and we had 3 comics on the showcase. And I would say, all of them appeal to different lines. So some of the lines would like one comic versus the other lines would like the other comic. So it really just depends on their demographics.
Yeah, my parents in the last 5 or 6 years have started going on cruises, and I remember just before I came up here, he's on one. They're on one now. Asking my dad which one he picked and why, and I remember looking in the brochure and I can't remember who it was. I think it was like Princess Cruise or something like that. He said, "Oh no, you don't go on that one. I'm not old enough for that one yet," kind of thing. And so it felt like they all have such a demographic that they're trying to appeal to in a way that most holidays don't, because you're kind of signing up to be pushed around, not pushed, you have to be moved around quite a lot and to be entertained in a certain way. So I'm wondering whether it's chicken and egg, whether you're part of that, I don't want to say branding, but that part of let's appeal to a certain demographic through these acts, or whether the buyers and the team there go, we're trying to appeal to these people, do you have people that match? What's chicken and egg in that? What goes first for you guys?
Well, just to clear up one thing that you had to say about the cruise lines pushing the people around, that used to be the case. I've been in the industry a long time, and it used to be that there were 2 times for dinner, 2 times for shows, and everybody kind of had, and then you wanted to capture a moment for revenue opportunities, so walk them through the shops before they get to dinner. That's really changed, and most of the cruise lines now have become very open with several different restaurants on board, show times kind of all over the place, and shows up against other shows to give the guest an opportunity to really kind of plan their own cruise. So it doesn't really fall into the you have to do this show at a certain time, then this. It's kind of like the Fringe, it's all over the place. You choose what you want to do now. So that's kind of changed. I just wanted to make sure that your audience understands that. But yes, when it comes to an all British line, for example, like some of the U.S. lines will send ships over to Europe in the summer, and some of their ships will be dedicated to a UK market. So they're really only marketing in the UK market. So for those ships, we're going to put forward acts that are really applicable to that market. So we wouldn't put forward an American comic, whereas other ships of theirs in their fleet might be catering much more to the American crowd. So they're marketing to an American audience. So there we are going to try to find either British comics that can work to an international audience, or we'll fly somebody over from the States.
Now, picking up on something you said as well just there about your dad and not being older, you'll find it's actually changing a lot as well. Not only is it just the demographics in terms of nationality, but it's also of age. So, for example, the cruise industry is just changing. It's such an enormous pace right now. The ships are bigger and bigger. The Symphony of the Sea is currently out there now with over 6,000 guests, I believe, on board. 3,000 to 4,000 crew members. It's like these floating cities. So they're appealing now to not older, but now to family and younger and young professionals. Now, already in the American market, it's taken off. So it's 25 to 40-year-olds will go cruising. So they have comedy clubs on board with the late night material instead of just your clean material on a main stage. So there is knowing that as well. If you're going to do a 3 or a 4 day cruise, that's going to be people wanting to get drunk and have a good time with a younger comic, as opposed to a 14-day voyage from Russia to Hong Kong is definitely going to be an older clientele. So it's almost like there's for sure a market for almost any type of comedian, but again, it's just knowing where to put them, and we can look at that from where the ship is, who's on board, and how long the voyage is.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to imply an older crowd go on. I was looking at doing one at some point because my dad and my mum in particular have talked it up so much where they've gone, you don't have to cook, like they just do it all for you, which was a big plus point for my mum. And you don't have to travel as such because you don't feel like you're traveling, like in the same way they've done road trips before, and they're like, you don't feel like you're traveling because you just don't notice it as such. I mean, you obviously see it out on the deck and stuff, but it's not. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't feel the same.
No, I know. You just open your window one day and you're like, oh, look, Venice.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It's weird. And when you come back to land personally after working on ships for years, it's kind of odd just to open up your window and you're like, oh, it's the same view. We're still here. It's kind of odd.
So, totally. And I can imagine, putting aside the talent on stage, there's certain skills that an act just has to have in terms of being able to adjust to performing at different times of the day or adjust to different I mean, do they pick people up? I just thought about this. Do they pick people up on the way round? Like if they started in Venice and they went to Dover, do they pick people up in Dover? I've never actually been on a cruise. So I'm wondering whether the language barriers would change if you start picking people up in other areas.
It really varies as to how the cruise line wants to put the talent on and off the ship. They're limited by cabin space and how many cabins are allotted for entertainment. So sometimes on a longer voyage, they'll have to ship hop people or switch people in different ports. So if a ship is sailing out of Southampton and doing the Med, for example, they might have a couple of performers get on in Southampton and then get off in Naples, and then a couple more will get on and work Naples to Greece, and then a couple more will get on and work within the Greek Isles. And it really just depends on the itinerary and how many nights they have to fill with different types of entertainers. So they'll do that, and we always know in advance how that's going to work. So that's how we'll offer the dates, and we'll let them know. You're getting on in the middle of one cruise, working to the middle of the next cruise, or you're getting on in the middle of the cruise and working to the end of the cruise. We usually have a pretty good idea of how they're going to be needed, so we can prepare the talent in advance and let them know what's going to be expected.
So how many shows a day would you do on the boat? And obviously it would depend on the ship and sort of their structure, but how many would a comedian be sort of asked to do? Let's say they were doing a week's cruise. Would it be sort of like Edinburgh, so it'd be like 2-3 shows a day? And would they need to do new material in each one? Because obviously I'm wondering what the burn rate is for material, given that the audience isn't going to change as quickly or as readily as a comedy club would.
So it really, really varies. Certain lines have comedy clubs, and the comics are hired to work every night in that club, and they can do the same material because the clubs are small and they have to rotate the guests through it so everyone has a chance to see the shows. Usually there's 1 or 2 comics splitting a show. Then there are the lines that have that are much smaller, that everybody has to do a main show, and usually that show is repeated to a second seating. That can be the same material, and then later on in the cruise they'll do a completely different second show, and usually shows are around 45 minutes, main shows, and then again they would have to repeat that to a second seating. So oftentimes, I'd say the majority of the times a comic will go on and work 2 shows. Maybe not 2 different 45s, but maybe a 45 and a 20. The 20 could be part of a split variety show, could be a farewell show, could be a welcome aboard show. But most of our talent would need to have at least an hour to an hour and 10 of material that can be broken out into a 45 and a 20 of clean material. Some cruise lines will want a main show that's clean, a 45-minute show, and then a 30-minute late night show, and that can usually be a little bit more risque.
When you say clean, is it just because my experience of doing clubs that say clean, it just means no swearing and none of the isms, so like no racism, sexism,
Trumpism.
Yeah, exactly. Is that not becoming more?
We cannot mention the T word now.
Really interesting.
It's the new swear word actually, because you say the T word and you'll have a line of guests ready to complain. It's just
either way, even if they're pro
either
or
way,
anti.
either way. It's like 50-50, right. And it's just such a divide. It's just anytime we get a new comic, it's like no T word. Like it's they're like, what's that stand for? It's not a swear word, but it is. So clean, really what we mean is on a ship, there could be family in the audience, there could be kids there could be older people. So it's not just about not swearing, it's just got to appeal to as if families were in the audience as well. So yeah, there's definitely, I would say, more opportunities for a clean comic in the cruise industry, because that would mean you're going to be in the theatre performing your 45-minute show, as opposed to the comedians in the clubs. There's not all of the ships have the clubs, but they all have a theatre stage.
How do comedians then try out for ships? Like, do you put them on for one day and try it that way? Is it like
No.
Well, no, I'm just saying in my experience, and I'm sure you've gone through this.
That's the risk, though. That's the risk we have to take, is before we even want to sign an act and put them out there. That's why so much research goes on. So from my side of it, when I worked on board, the backlash, maybe I think you were touching on this with your friend, it's pretty horrendous if it doesn't go well for an act, because they're trapped on board with the guests.
Yeah.
So I did have one or two instances where it happened, and it's unnerving, and it kind of sucks, because you want everyone to succeed, and all these people are on their holidays, so they're there to have a good time. And I think that's why most comics love it, because they are guaranteed a sellout audience of over 1,000 people a night, laughing and cheering. There's no pressure about having to fly her outside on the cruise ship mall, like come and see a show. They'll just be there. So I think that's a huge appeal, and what a lot of the draw is for a lot of comics, to have that packed out audience every time they get on that stage.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, whether there's like a low number that they don't run gigs for, because obviously there's a captive audience there that aren't going to go away, but like you said, because there's so many other things happening at the same time, it could be like the Fringe, where 100 people turn up instead of 1,000 because they've gone to other things, or they're all at dinner, or just anything could clash. So is it like, if there's only 2 people in the audience, they go, maybe we'll pull this gig? I mean, like, what's the low end for a gig to obviously again,
there is no low end.
Oh, so if there's one person,
if
then
there's a show scheduled, they'll do a show they'll do the show. They're pretty experienced at scheduling on board. So for an off night would be a night where a ship is overnighting in a port, and a lot of the guests get off the ship to go out for dinner or go for a show shoreside or something like that. They'll still put something on the stage that night for those guests who opt to stay on board, and then that can be a low count. But usually that show is scheduled again for later in the cruise, and then there are more guests there. So most people will have the opportunity to perform for a full theater.
And it would be mean to put a comic on the overnight. I always try to avoid that. You kind of want to put the more visual thing or something and keep the comics for the busy nights, for sure.
Completely. Yeah. The TV and the radio industry are very much geared to youth and very much geared to finding the next big thing. I'm wondering what your definition of next big thing is, and whether you're looking for sort of an act that has a longevity, so like a 20-year-old who can go for a long time, or whether you're just looking for an experienced act who obviously would be better than someone who's not been going very long. What's new and what's exciting talent for you?
I mean, I would say it's a bit of both, again, depending on the line, because the bigger ships and these younger guests on board, they want the younger, fresher comics. A lot of these people, a lot of my generation, the 30-year-olds, go to comedy clubs now a lot. We watch it on TV. Comedians are the new rock stars selling out arenas, so there's high expectations within our demographic. So with that, it's great to find this new talent with new material that aren't the same old cruise ship jokes. You know, how about that buffet, and how about that airport? So it's great, whereas those older jokes will work with the older demographic. So it's great to get the experience one, because for us it's like a trust, like, oh, this will be fine, we've nothing to worry about him, he'll go and do a great job, he's done X, Y, and Z. But it's also exciting to find the younger talent who can go out there and appeal to everyone still, but with fresh material. So we really are looking for everything.
One of the things to bear in mind also, especially with younger performers, is experience level in just dealing with life on board, because that can be that can make or break an act if they get on board a ship and they don't know how to behave properly. Sometimes younger people will find themselves, hanging out with the crew in the crew bars, going to the bars too much, and then you have the other guests on board saying, "Oh, wasn't he the comic that we saw earlier? Oh, look, he's really wasted over there." It's not a good thing. So certainly, performers who have been around the block, who have been on board before, know how to behave. They value the work. They want to continue being able to work in this industry, so they don't mess up. Whereas sometimes the younger performers, we have to really counsel the performers. Daniel does a call with anyone who's new, who's not either been out on a ship before or out on a particular line, to review the different policies. There's policies and rules on board for all the talent. And it's really important that they dress properly, that they know where they're supposed to go and not supposed to go, that they show up on time for their rehearsal, that they're not too demanding, that they're not divas on board. There is a lot of that. A lot of that can be equally as important as the actual material in the show itself.
So when I do a gig, if I go to a club, I'm there for maybe 2-3 hours. I'll do 20 minutes, and between that, I don't feel on as such. So like if I watch the first half because I'm on the second half, I feel like I can just blend in quietly and sit at the back and it's fine. And then if I need to get changed into something, I can do that later. Would it be fair to say that the act is on as such for the time they're on the ship because there's always the audience watching them? Or is there much time for downtime or alone time, or how does that work for them?
There is a lot of downtime and alone time, and a lot of our comics that are writers will use that time in their cabin to work on their material, develop new material, or writing books or whatever they're working on. Others are more social and love being out and about and seeing all the guests. The guests will come up and talk to them all the time. They'll critique their shows. They'll come and tell them, "I loved you." They'll come up and tell them, "I didn't like your show, Mrs. Y." And they have to be able to take that.
Once you have performed, you're then on, because then you're recognized. So enjoy that first night when no one knows who you are. You walk around the buffet and have fun. No one will talk to you. But then as soon as you perform, you're an ambassador now for that cruise line. You're the celebrity on the ship. They want to get to know you. They want to tell you, "Oh, I know a joke you should put in your material. My grandson would love to be a comedian. Maybe you could talk sometime." That kind of stuff. But you're on once you've performed, and it's kind of cool though, Yeah, there's a lot of some of the smaller ships, the more luxurious, we call them, the much more expensive. Those guests will invite the performers to dinner, they'll invite them to the bar, and you're expected to be out and about and socialize the entire time. So even though you may just have 2 shows in 10 days, those other 8 days, you need to be around the ship having drinks with people and talking to them, because that's what the guests want. They feel like they owed that kind of time with you to get to know you.
You're kind of, because you mentioned Disney Cruise Lines before, and in my head, and forgive me if I'm misrepresenting or misthinking about performers, it feels very much like when you're at Disneyland, for example, there's characters hanging around and just sort of like taking part in breakfasts and all that sort of stuff. It feels like a very similar case of events if you're one of the performers. Is that a good way of looking at it, or
Yes, absolutely. And on Disney Cruise Line, there are characters who they're doing the same types of things, and the performers as well. So all of the performers on Disney Cruise Line are representing the brand. So they're extremely careful in protecting their brand. So they're very careful who they will even hire to go on their ships. So we really vet the performers before we put anybody on Disney Cruise Line. So first of all, of course, want them to be successful.
Yeah.
But second of all, we understand that brand.
Definitely.
Probably just because I worked there for so long, I think we understand that brand better than most other agencies.
Yeah, definitely. I found it really interesting. My dad rang me because the ship had docked and some people had got off, and so instead of doing a live show, they put on I think it was a Netflix special. Essentially they put on, like, they showed a comedian, and then later on, for the one that he actually stayed for, was he wanted to watch Billy Joel live because he's a big Billy Joel fan, and obviously they're not going to put that on he's not going to do that boat, but they put on the sort of, I think it was at Madison Square Garden or something, and he watched the whole thing. And I found it really interesting that they would put that on or do that, especially as Netflix Netflix and a lot of binge watching and TV comedians and comedy has impacted a lot of the live circuit. And I wondered whether that's a trend you're seeing, or whether that's just an interesting move forward where people are actually just watching what they could watch at home, but in like a bigger cinema room that they don't have at home. What's going on there with the industry?
Well, I remember when it started with one of the lines when they put the very large screen TV out by the pool.
Yeah.
And then they started showing cartoons and kids movies, and that was brilliant really for the families, because the kids might otherwise, it's sometimes between the kids program on board and going ashore, it seems like there's enough to do with kids, but parents really want relief when they go on vacation. And if they can sit around the pool and enjoy, just hanging out there, and the kids are, playing in the pool and watching a movie at the same time, it proved to be pretty successful. And then they also use those screens to support activities that they're doing out there. If they're having, a dance party, then they can project on the screen, something, it gives it more of a disco feel. They can do different types of support for the events. So I think it started there, and it's just kind of grown. Every line, once one line saw another line do it and saw it be successful, they wanted to do it. So you have started to see sports bars with all kinds of, with live feeds. In different bars on board, and more screens around the ship. And I don't know, what do you think?
I think, yes, as I know Netflix is doing the huge push for stand-up comedy, and that's great. I don't think it's influenced it so much, because I think that the one thing that's always going to be the constant of entertainment is comedy. You'll see times when jugglers are the in thing, and then, we're bored of that. And then, let's get some Broadway singers in, and we're bored of that now. But there's always going to be comedy. It's just in what capacity they're on board. I think even before Netflix, it was something or other. It was a DVD, or it was the arena tours and whatnot. But I think if it's not Netflix, it would be Comedy Central or somebody else doing it, because there's always that need for comedy.
If someone had done if you were booking someone who'd done a Netflix special or like a Conan appearance or something like that, would they be allowed to do that material on the ship, or would it be a case of they've probably seen it, they're not going to want to watch it again? Yeah,
you can absolutely do it. Sometimes the guests might like it because I've seen them do this. It's great. Watch. You know what I mean? They actually like it. And listen, comics go back out on the same ship. They might go on a ship and 2 weeks later be back on the same ship, but different guests. But it's the same material still. They're not changing the material because it's the same ship. So it's just finding that the material, that solid 45-minute killer show that works. And of course, some guests may see it, but 99% won't have seen that show before. So it's really just like honing that perfect. It's not a time to try out material for sure on a main stage in front of 2,000 people. Like, there's 2,000 people not laughing, because that's like written in the comment cards. He was just okay. I'd rather see someone else. That's going to affect your career on there.
But if you're doing a show and you've got 2,000 people, I'm assuming there'd be an element of it that you want to make it feel in the room. You want to do a bit of observation. You want to do that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And I'm guessing that. So that is kind of them trying something out because they're in the room, or do you think a lot of that ad-libbing has come out of years of doing it, and so they just tried a little bit and it builds from there?
I think it's great to ad-lib and involve the audience. That's fantastic, but I think you still need to have those moments in between the ad-lib. So when it's something you feel like it's not working, okay, back to that joke that kills. And then when someone comes in late or gets up, where you going? All that kind of stuff is great, and the audience love to feel like they're a part of the show for sure. Especially with comedians, and in the clubs, it's real personal. You're sitting right in front of the comedian, so some of the lines prefer them to improvise a little bit with the audience. I feel like when it's a main theatre, they're so large, it's almost hard, apart from round of applause if you've done this, because you can't see anything apart from let me hear you if you have done, but you can tell if it's working if 2,000 people are laughing or not, for sure.
Yeah, of course.
But what I would advise against is building your whole show around that, because we have found that the comics that are where are you from? Okay, how long? Yeah, that when they start out that way, you have to start out with some material. Mm-hmm. You really have to show the audience that you are professional, that you know what you're doing, that you've got clever, fun, interesting material that they're going to like, and then you can break into a little bit more kind of back and forth with the audience, play with them a little bit. The other thing I would caution against is being aggressive with the audience, like in a negative way. That doesn't work on a cruise ship. The really important thing to remember is these people are on vacation. They're there to have fun. Nobody wants to be insulted. So an aggressive, insulting kind of comic doesn't work for us.
You want to win their credibility before you start to play with the credibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to. It's really, really critical in that market.
Yeah, because just because it's going to sound quite harsh, but just because you've managed to get through the selection process to be in the gig doesn't mean they're going to instantly give you that level of respect.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay, so obviously there are some acts that you actively represent, and I'm assuming there's some that you aren't signed to you, but you freelance in for stuff. Is that right, or do you only deal with acts?
We only deal with acts that we want to represent.
That you represent. Okay, so let's you can pick any act if you want specifically, but let's just say comedian A that you represent. How does their scheduling work for you? Do they have other commitments often, so that they sort of split it? Is it a case of they can only work like a certain number of days at sea because of legislation? How far ahead do they know that they're going to be doing certain cruises? How does that work?
It's really all over the place.
Oh, right, fine.
So some prefer to only work once a month maybe, and then what we'll do is we'll take that schedule of when they're available and push it out there to the lines where we feel that person would be successful and try to get them dates that way. Others are looking to make a living doing this. It's tougher, but it can be done. Usually we have to move those performers around many different cruise lines to try to fill their schedule. Others want to work only for one line, and sometimes that line loves having that comic and will just give them a schedule in advance. We already have several comics completely booked for 2019. So it really just depends.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, it's almost like that relationship thing, and it's also part of the jigsaw, and it's finding that comedian's home. So because the lines are so different and the brands they appeal to, you'll finally find a match more often than not. But I don't think we have many, if any, comics that could work every single cruise line because they're all so different. It's so hard to transition into each one. So yeah, and some people do a lot of TV and club work, but as long as we know up front, you'll give us your open calendar and we'll try and fill it if that's what you want.
Yeah, it's a bit like there's a naivety when you first start out. I'm sure you had this where lots of comedians go, I want to play every room. Yeah. And you're like, well, that's a stupid idea, because you're never going to be able to do that. You're never going to have the option to play every room. So it seems really odd. So it makes sense that your job is basically pairing.
Yes, and it's also like a slow process, because going from that day where we will sign you to our agency, it becomes a long process then to submit the promo everywhere and to get that relationship built between them trusting us to try the act, getting the act out there. The date might be 6 months away. Once we get the date, they finally go on the date, then they get the good report, which we wait a couple of weeks to receive, and then so it can be like a year to get an act out there for a couple of dates even, so a lot of it is that.
Once an act does go out and do well though, and we get a good report back, we can use that to kind of convince some of the other lines that this would be a good act for you. Some are really more shy to hire new acts than others. Maybe they've had a few that didn't go over well and they're timid to try someone new. So it really, really just depends. We do a lot of showcasing. So we'll showcase individually for a cruise line, or we'll do a showcase and open up to a lot of different cruise lines, invite the buyers. When they can come in and see a performer for 10 or 15 minutes, they get a much better idea if that performer is going to work on their line or not. And then sometimes they'll wait around and meet the performer after the showcase is done. They get a good feeling, they get to know them a little bit, and they feel more confident to give that person a try.
If say comedian A did really well on cruise line A, and cruise line A has a competitor, let's call them cruise line B, would cruise line B, would that work to their advantage, because obviously they're like, well, we're attracting the same people? Yep. Or would it be like, well, they've been on that one, we want someone else because we want a different...
No, they actually, I think they're much more comfortable with, so you have, different types of cruise lines. You have luxury lines, which are really the high-end lines, much more expensive, a very, very well-heeled group of guests. And only a certain type of comic can really work those lines successfully. And once we have achieved that with one comic who's done well on one of those lines, we know that they're going to do well on the others as well. So we have the confidence to push them. It's the same with the kind of the more mass market lines, the ones with the really large ships and, that are appealing to a younger crowd, for example. Some lines are more adult than others. So they want a sophisticated comic, not somebody who's just bawdy. So it really depends. And that's where our knowledge comes in. So understanding the demographics and the comic's strengths so that we're able to make a match.
Yeah, and I think as well, not forgetting that cruise lines are a corporation and it's all about ratings. So from the onboard team, you get nervous on board, like when a comic comes on board, the last thing I want to hear as a cruise director before they go on stage is like, oh, this is my first time. I'm like, what? Yeah. So you're like, let's go through all of your material right now before you go on that stage, because that affects ratings, which affects bonuses for the onboard team, which affects bonuses and ratings for the corporation in the offices in Miami or wherever. So yeah, it really is a lot about that trust, that rapport. Like it's almost like a security blanket. Like, it's okay. Like, they've done a good job somewhere, so they're definitely not going to die a death. Yeah. So we'll give them a try. So it really does help to get that report.
Yeah. You were talking about the report, and so a lot of holidays now have TripAdvisor things, and a lot of people obviously on social media. Is that report taking that into account, or is the report specifically people on board who tech the theatre or the comedy club who are telling you what they think? How does that work?
So on board, there's always a head of an entertainment department. It's normally the cruise director or an entertainment director, whatever they want to call it.
Who go around with the ship?
So they'd be on board. So I did that, and so I was on board for 4 to 6 month contracts at a time, not a single day off. It's all glamorous. But you're the face of the entertainment department. So when the guests come on, you're the guy, and all the guests think you book the talent on board. They don't understand it's actually someone in an office somewhere. So that when a show happens, the reports will come. You'll get the feedback straight after a show. They love to tell you what they thought. So you can
the audiences,
straight away. Cool. So that comic last night. I don't think he was very good, and he was fantastic. So you know what the general, and also it's your job to watch every show because you have to write your report back on what you thought they did from a professional level. Did the guests respond? Was it a standing ovation? Were people walking out? Were people laughing? So that's one indicator. That comes from the cruise director's opinion. And then the second one would be at the end of every cruise, the guests have to write out a comment card. And so they write their feedback on the acts. And so that all gets sent to the offices and sent back to the ships within 1 to 2 weeks. And so from that, you can just highlight the name of the comic and you'll see all of the comments that came up with him. Great, thought he was hilarious. So great. So that's kind of what it is. It's the feedback cards at the end of a cruise and the onboard feeling at the time. We don't have time to go through Yelp and TripAdvisors. It's really like what happened at the time, because you're always going to get someone who will go on Yelp and found a hair in the food, therefore ruined the entire cruise, hated the comedy, hated the production shows because there was hair in my food. So you kind of have to be wary of things like that too.
You touched on making a living from being a cruise comic, and I think a fair amount of my audience are going to want to know whether that is a viable option. And without maybe going to specifics, or maybe you can give general numbers, is it a case of, is the pay better or worse than land gigs? Where does it fit in the scale of sort of clubs on land to corporate events?
Not so sure about here in Europe. In the States, it's become a very viable venue. There are a lot of cruise lines, a lot of cruise ships. They all want comedy, so there's a fair amount of opportunity. I think the clubs in the States don't pay that well unless you're a headliner, like a real headliner, like a name act. So it's harder for the average comic who hasn't made it to that level to find reliable, steady work. So I think from our perspective, we have a handful of comics that pretty much just do the cruise industry. Then we have a larger group who maybe mix it up with some land dates and some cruises, maybe do 12 to 15 cruises a year, maybe 20. And then there are the comics who are really successful in the corporate market and in writing. They have writing gigs. They do a lot of other things, and they might only take 5 or 6 cruises a year. So it really just depends, and we get to know them. And actually, we kind of try to get an understanding from the comic as we sign them, what they really are looking for. If you have someone who we feel maybe might not be a star in the comedy industry, in the cruise industry, but they might there might be some places where we can book that person and they're looking for 50 weeks a year. We're going to discourage that because we're not going to be able to do it. And the guy's going to be calling us every week. I need to eat. I need work. What are you doing for me? And we already knew up front that maybe he's limited because of the amount of material he has or the type of material he has or whatever it is. Or he lives in some real far away place that it's difficult for the line to fly him to the ships. All those things can kind of work against someone. So we try to be as clear as possible with talent. Like, this is what the expectation is. You know, if you're expecting to work 52 weeks a year, probably isn't going to happen.
I would say financially though as well, it's worth it because apart from the several thousand a week you could get, there's the merchandise to be had, because you then, instead of just playing to a room of 50 in a club, you'd now have thousands of people on board that may buy a CD or a DVD. So it's not even just the fee, it's the merchandise that goes with it. So it can be quite lucrative for sure. And that's the addictive part of it. It's like, oh, so I just go traveling for a week and just do one show and make this. And like, yeah, it's you meet all these people, and then what happens is, you never know who's in the audience on cruise ships nowadays. A lot of people will find work from people being in the audience, and they book corporate from that, and they book condos and gigs in comedy clubs in New York, and so for sure it can definitely be lucrative. Yeah.
So that's allowed, or is it a case of they have a merch stand that the ship will cover and look after, or is it a case of the comedian will be selling their own merch outside and they're fine with that?
Yep, either or. Often it'll be the case of a comic would finish the show, and as the cruise director's taken off the show, you'll run around to the back of the theatre to meet someone from the shops on a table with your merch ready to sell. You'll do the whole "thank you for coming to my show," and I'll sign it, and the shop person will continue to sell for you.
Nice. And if someone did get work from a cruise, is it a case of you get 15% of that money, or is it a case of it's completely independent because it's kind of do you know what I mean? Like, they wouldn't have met if you hadn't have done that, but it's not the work, you found them, so it kind of feels...
It's a bit of both, actually. Yeah. Oftentimes, they'll meet someone on board, and that person will just talk to them directly and give them a card and say, hey, we're having an anniversary party next year, and I want you to be at that party. And typically that would be direct. Sometimes they'll call the line, or they'll call us. The guy will just give them our card and say, I prefer to do everything through my agents. So they'll contact us directly, and we'll book them on the event. Or they'll just call and say, I saw this comic and I think he's through you, and would he be available to do this theater for us? And then we'll follow up on it and do it. So it's a bit of both.
Yeah. And in terms of bombing on stage or bombing on the ship, yeah, I like how neither of you wanted to ask this question.
I've been there.
Oh, wait, you specifically saying he's bombed? Or
No, I was the cruise director who had to take off the bombing comic.
Okay, so specifically, is that taking them off the ship, or is that taking them off?
Both, actually, in this instance, yeah.
How bad do you have to bomb to get taken off a ship?
Yeah, because this was an instance where the comic was doing the middle of one cruise and staying onto the middle of the next. So they would have performed the same show to two different guests kind of thing. So they did the first set of guests, and it was pretty bad. This was one of those instances in the wings, like not only have I never been on a ship before, but I've never even been on a theatre stage before. Wish me luck.
Right.
And I've just died a little bit inside. So as I'm watching from the wings, I just no material, like zero material, and it was just improv with the audience, but not even jokes. Right. So to the point where it was so bad, not only did you watch the audience go from 1,500 to 100 in 10 minutes.
To walk out, yeah, of course. Yeah.
It then it filled back up again because it was so bad. People were saying, you have to come watch this person die. And so it was a female, and she was supposed to have a second set 2 hours later, and it was packed because people had spread the word, you're going to love how bad this comic is. So anyway, the 45-minute set, I convinced her to do 20 because people were mad that I wanted her to not do it. Yeah. Okay. We've heard about this show. We want to see it. We've paid money. We want to see this bad comic. We're like, oh God. So off she went for the 20-minute set instead of 45. Right. And bombed that as well. Everyone left. And so we had to disembark her and then turn around and get a new comic to replace because
she airlifted off. It feels like
probably thrown off. Walked the plank. Yeah, and it was. Listen, it's heartbreaking. Nobody wants that. No, the guests don't want to see that. The comic doesn't want it. I don't want it. It was just one of those, mishaps that it just can happen from time to time. It's very, very rare. But said comedian has since written a show about the experience and gone on tour with it. So,
It's all material.
Catch it at the Fringe.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, they're here?
Yeah, a couple I think it was last year. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
There you go. So
yeah, something positive maybe came out of it in a weird way.
Yeah.
That's
For the
good.
comic.
For the
For
comic.
the
Oh, yeah,
comic,
I was saying for
not
the
for
comic.
me on board,
Oh,
who had to
not at all.
hide for the last 2 days of the cruise because I was getting screamed at. Why did you book that comic? And it wasn't me.
How did you replace them then? Like, do you have last minute stand-ins ready for that?
You're right. You send an email to the office, get this person off the ship. I
Yeah.
can't have them perform next cruise.
Yeah.
And it's like they contact the agent. That person switches out with another comic. They come the next day. Who's available? Can somebody get to this ship in a day's time and perform for a 2-day gig and fly home again?
I've just had a thought how bad it must have been for that replacement comic, because people were probably still coming thinking it's going to be the shit one, so they're probably just sitting there going, go on, be shit, and so there's just sort of having to bring it back up again. Was that what happened?
Well, no, because those guests had left. That's the thing. So after
Right.
2 days, the guest turned around, and then the new comic came to a new set
Oh,
of
okay,
guests. So
fine.
they had no idea.
okay,
Thank
right.
goodness.
I was like thinking that has got to be the hardest to kind of come back
No.
from.
But
Yeah.
kind of, it's annoying because we had it was a 10-day, 12-day cruise, and the guests had forgot every single other entertainer apart from that one.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I wondered how you deal with bombings, how what your level of support is for obviously the mental health of the comedian who is trying to be a character on a cruise ship and meet everyone, but obviously hasn't performed well, so is obviously, as you say, going to get feedback and going to hear from people.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that never gets to that point of a did that time, though. That's the whole
Yeah,
point
yeah.
of the
That's
job
the
of an
anomaly.
agent and the bookers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that one happened because that comic showcased, and the booker from that line loved that comic at the showcase. And the comic, to her credit, did well at the showcase and did well on another ship in a comedy club environment. So many just cannot get past that. They're great in a comedy club, but they can't do a main theater. And we just didn't catch it. So the person ended up on the main stage, and it just wasn't a good fit. So that does happen from time to time, but it's pretty rare. And I'd say the level of caution booking that line went up dramatically. That was a couple years ago, and we've not had anybody bomb since then. So that really is rare when that happens.
Last two questions. One, what are the biggest common mistakes that comedians make when they first do a cruise line? Other than mention Trump.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, sometimes what I've seen is a comic who we know has the right material will go out and do the wrong material, and they'll do it because they will get nervous. They'll be in front of an audience, and they'll think, oh, they're not laughing as much as they should. Let me just throw that one joke that I know always gets them in there, but we know it's not the right joke. It's might have sexual orientation, or it might be bathroom humor, or it just might be something that's not appropriate. But he's so used to getting a laugh for that he'll throw it in there, and then that's just not a wise move to do that. Maybe missing a ship, that's never a good thing. I mean, not paying enough attention to the credentials of what you're supposed to be doing, like what time you're supposed to get there, what time you're supposed to get to your rehearsal. You need to be on board by 1:00, even though the ship doesn't sail till 5. Maybe not looking at your airline ticket closely enough and missing your flight. Those things will kill you before you even get on the stage, because no matter how great a comic you are, if you can't get to the gig on time, that leaves a lasting impression.
Can I just quickly expand on something you said there, where you said, so like if they've got some sexual orientation material, and before you were saying clean material and avoiding certain subjects, how much is political correctness or the sort of shift in political correctness? I don't know how much it's impacted American comic in general, but over here there's been a big move to be more politically correct. I think a lot more comedians are, even if they're right-leaning personally, they're sort of performing more left-wing because it feels more liberal, and they're able to talk about certain subjects in a certain way that appeals to more people. How much is that affecting what people are saying on stage or are able to say?
A lot. I think observational humor is the best at this point. It's very hard for a comic to do any political material. You don't want to attack somebody on their weight. I mean, the buffet jokes are the buffet jokes, but you have to be careful because of, there's a real movement in the wellness community, and that's something that you want to be careful about. Bathroom humor only belongs in a comedy club. Sexual-oriented humor, same thing. In a comedy club, you really can't do it on a main stage. What do you think?
I think there's a big difference as well from being on board with a British audience and an American audience. It also depends on that because, you know, as Brits, we love the old panto innuendos, the puns that will fly over the kids' heads, but the adults get.
Yep.
There's a lot of that as well. But it's also just a huge shift even from like, you know, the 1980s comics of Jim Davison's and the misogyny and whatnot to the current day. Just can't do that anymore. You can't do impressions of accents of wherever the person may be from, of an Indian or a Chinese person. As a cruise director, you just, you know, in the wing, like on tenterhooks, doing any comic set unless you know the comic well, because you're like, what could because at some point there'll be one guest takes offense to something, and you need to be there to listen to the entire set to see, was it actually offensive or is this person just, you know, being miserable? So it's a lot of that as well, and that's what's so tough being a comic on a ship, because anyone can be offended for the slightest thing, because everyone is from all over the world, from every different race or nationality with different backgrounds. So what's not offensive to you as a British person may be to a South African, you know. So there's a lot of that as well. But yeah, for sure, it's on the comic's best interest as well to try and play it safe, because that one person complaining can make it into the report. So it doesn't matter that the other 3,000 people loved it, that one person complaining is in the report. I guess thought it was too this or too raunchy, and you're like, ugh.
Last question. If you could give one bit of advice to a few thousand comedians who would love to get into performing on cruise lines, what would you say to them?
I would say send us your promo. Contact us, but, you know, really pay attention to that promo. Do some homework. And that's what I always try to tell them. I've done a lot of panels at comedy festivals and things like that. And I try to tell the comics, do some homework. Go look at the websites of the go look at our website, for example, and see what comics we're booking. See and look at their reels and see why, you know, why we're booking them. You know, how they look and what kind of material they're doing, and or maybe go watch some of their other material on YouTube and see what's working, and then, you know, check in with us and see what you think. It's really a lot about it. About the cruise industry is understanding the industry itself. You know. And a lot of that, they're going to just do some work on your own. I mean, we can't do it all for you. We'll get lots of people calling saying, I really want to work on a cruise ship. What do I need to do? I don't have time. You know, we don't have time to do that. You know, we'll do it if we see somebody and we think they're really good and they have potential. Obviously, we'll do that. But we get contacted by hundreds of people. So obviously, if the one who's done more homework than the next is going to grab our attention more quickly.
I would say promo material is the key. That is the tool that we're going to see to be interested in you in the first place, to maybe explore more, but it's also going to be what gets you the job in the first place as well with the bookers. So if you want to work on cruise ships, you need to get your friend who's good on Mac, if you're not, to put a couple of edits together of something. But really, is this 90 seconds that are about to see your best 90 seconds that's going to sell yourself, or have you just got someone to film your last gig on an iPhone and we are just watching the first 90 seconds of your set? Like Robin said, go on dcptalent.com and look at our comics and look at their promo. It's in your face. They want high energy, they want laughter. We want to see, you know, the product that the person's going to be buying. It's like buying something at the supermarket. Like, you know, what I see is what they want to buy, and I don't want you to defer from that. Don't show clean material and then go on stage and do a completely different set. And we said, well, that's not what we saw on the tape. So I think promo material, and for sure, do your homework.
Great, thank you very much for coming on. That was Dan and Robin. Their take on the cruise ship industry, their honesty on what it takes to make it and how they scout. And I really found it interesting how Trump is now their big swear word. I feel like that man has had way too much of an impact on the comedy industry. And given the amount of comedians I see doing material about Trump, it must be agonizing for them to watch a performer they probably want to book, but then they hit the T word, and maybe they'll have to have a conversation with them before they even think about progressing it to a contract or to even discussing whether they'd like to do cruise ship comedy. I loved hearing how social media and TripAdvisor has impacted the industry. I think we've all bought something or gone somewhere or done something on a holiday as a result of a review from a complete stranger on a website, which is fascinating to me, and it really shows the power of word of mouth marketing, which, as someone who goes to the Edinburgh Festival every year, is more than aware that it makes and breaks a show. So it's interesting that also applies at sea. Although I don't think cruise ship comedy is my calling, I did learn a lot about that side of the industry. And if you think it is something for you, I've put a link in the show notes where you can send them your show reel. Also, if you'd like to thank them, I put both their handles as well as the Don Casino Twitter handle in the show notes, so you can tweet them or me. I'm at This Made Me Cool. Sending a thank you really helps out the show, and it really shows the support from the audience base to the industry themselves. So if you could do something like that, maybe not for this episode if you don't want to, but for any episode that you've really appreciated, take a minute, tweet the guest, tweet me, and I'll thank you personally for doing that, because it really helps us out. If you've enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy my episode with Jeremy Lee from JLA on how to crack the corporate comedy circuit. I've also interviewed a number of comedy club owners from around the UK, and if you just have a scroll back through the feed, you should be able to find, I think I've done 12 or 15 in the last 100 episodes, so that should be enough to keep you going. I've also got a few coming out soon, including Binti from Hot Water Comedy. Can't wait for that one. That is going to be amazing, as they have an outstanding reputation, and frankly the club is amazing and the ethos behind it. And anyway, I'm not going to get into that too much, but keep your eye out for that one. The Ask the Industry podcast is a Fruit That Got in Gravity's Way production for the internet. All elements were created by me, comedian Simon Caine. Thank you very much for listening, thank you very much for subscribing, and thank you very much for rating and donating if you do. I'll see you all in about 14 days' time. Before you go, I just want to quickly say I'm going to be at the Edinburgh Festival. I'm drilling down the details on dates, times, and all that sort of stuff. But just so you're aware, I'm going to be at the Edinburgh Festival in 2019. I'm also going to be previewing the show from about April onwards around the country, and then I'm going to be on tour in September and October. Now, this is the most vague plug I've done for anything, but essentially I'm going to be updating my website with these details as soon as they are available. Please do keep an eye out for them. I'd really appreciate it, as that would really help. The one thing I can confirm is I am doing a one-off, potentially DVD record. Again, that is something I'm dealing with. I'm sorting it out. Of Sex, Drugs and Other Things I Never Do at the Bloomsbury Theatre in London on the 21st of March 2019. If you can come to that, please do. If you would like to get half off the tickets, tweet me. Tweet me something like... Tweet me something mysterious like, my favourite macaroon is strawberry flavoured, right? Tweet me that, and I would DM you the discount code so you can get money off your tickets to come and see that show live. I'd really love to get some of you listeners in and to watch the show. I'm really, really excited about it, but also really nervous about it, as it's quite a big space, even though it's the studio space. But I want to get the thing recorded and out the door. So if you can come, please do. If you can't come, please tell a friend, and hopefully they'll come. Thanks for listening. Bye.